Welcome to RotoWire Fantasy Football Live. Obviously, we're here 5 days a week, 11 a.m. Eastern. If you missed the show, you can always catch the replay on RotoWire YouTube. Again, during the preseason, I take off Thursdays and Fridays, but the other days, we are here. We have great guests every day. Hopefully, you're going to be enjoying the show. If you do like the show, make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button on RotoWire YouTube. I'd appreciate it greatly. It also helps let us know if the show is something you value. And please follow me on socials at Jim Coventry NFL. On Twitter, I'll do 5 to 7 player profile threads every week. And so I look forward to doing those for you to help you make your best decisions when you're on the clock in your fantasy football draft. Finally, stay tuned to the end of the show. I have Jorge Martin of RotoWire, Yahoo Fantasy, Fantasy Points, Fantasy Pros, all over the place. Great guy. He's going to be talking 2023 quarterback draft strategy. But of course, we start today covering the recent news and notes from the fantasy football landscape. Let's start out with the Denver Broncos news. Man, rough news for the team yesterday. I love Tim Patrick. He's a very good player. Now, an Achilles injury. It'll be 2 straight season-ending injuries. He's a very good downfield receiver. He's a little more than that, but he, I think, was going to be a staple in that offense, and I do believe he could have pushed Courtland Sutton for snaps, but regardless, he was clearly in the mix in 3 receiver sets. And we know that Sean Payton does design downfield shots, and Russell Wilson can make those throws. So Tim Patrick may have, been a thing, but obviously the poor man can't catch a good break here. And so his Achilles will take him down for the season. And then KJ Hamler, who he's had his own injury concerns. Well, he's been waived to a non-football illness designation. And so now all of a sudden, this depth chart, which Mims was I'm sorry, I'm going to get to Mims in a second. I got a little excited there, but Hamler was like the 4, right? Patrick the 3. Well, all of a sudden in one day, that depth chart goes Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, and now 2nd round draft pick Marvin Mims. So, and I know there'll be competition, but they spent a 2nd round pick on him. And, he's 5'11", 183, so the size is good enough. He tested well, his 40-yard dash time, 86th percentile. His explosiveness, outstanding, 92nd. His agility was just league average, 50th percentile. But realistically, his game is explosion and speed, right? And I see him, he could play the slot, but Jerry Jeudy played 76% slot last year. So I think Jeudy remains there primarily. He does so well in the slot. But I saw Mims as a Z receiver, where he's the one that's a little off the line of scrimmage, get that free release. Courtland Sutton would be the X on the line of scrimmage, taking on the contact. But I believe with the speed and explosiveness of Marvin Mims, he's like crisp in and out of breaks too. And so I do think that he is going to be a very good fit for the offense. And I think he sails into that role. So when they're in 3 receiver sets, he is definitely a player on the rise. Now, as to what Russell Wilson has in the tank, you're hitching your wagon to him. And, there will be downfield shots, but they won't all go to Mims. I don't know how the consistency will be. Wilson was a bad quarterback for most of the year last year. Had a couple games in garbage time, one against the Chiefs, and then one in that Week 18 game where Chargers didn't have to win, but they played starters. And it was a weird game. But other than that, Marvin Mims, the cons to his game, he's not a physical guy. Even though, he's at 183, right? But he can get knocked off his routes. His short area running isn't refined. Has a small catch radius. So I see him like as a situational deep threat. And that's a very good thing to have. NFL offenses need these. But I don't think for fantasy, unless Sutton were to miss time and he has to expand the role. But I think this is a perfect scenario for him to settle in as a rookie. But it's going to be, again, situational deep threat stuff. So the fantasy production is going to be very, very volatile week to week. So right now, I have him right around that wide receiver 60 range. So it's a wide receiver 5, right around there. And I think, and it's even bordering wide receiver 6. So it's right on that fringe there. But I don't want him as a wide receiver 4 because I just don't think the role is been. And I think that Sean Payton does want to run the ball quite a bit. I do believe that he knows what Russell Wilson is, and he does not want to make this a pass-centric offense. So again, I do like Marvin Mims, and I do think the role is great for him, but I just think that consistent volume will definitely be a bit of an issue. Every day we have Indianapolis Colts news. It just doesn't stop. I'm not going to focus this one on Jonathan Taylor. We kind of know the deal right here, that right now the team, however they're going to handle his situation, whether they're going to try to play some shenanigans and put him on the non-football injury list where they basically just let him sit there and rot. And then, he's in the same contract situation next year. Don't know what's going to happen. Taylor wants money. It sounds like Irsay's not going to pay him. So really, when you're in fantasy drafts, you're in no man's land, because if Taylor doesn't play and now he's going into the third round in drafts because of this uncertainty, it's like, what do you do, right? Well, backup wise, Zach Moss was really strong down the stretch last year. He looked very good, but now he breaks his arm. And so he's like 4 to 6 weeks out, which may put him into the regular season. It may not. But in the meantime, that allows other backs in camp to get an opportunity. Now, Deion Jackson, he did see extensive work when Jonathan Taylor and at the time Nyheim Hines eventually traded. But while they were missing time, he puts up 68 carries for 236 yards. It's fine enough. Nothing, it was under 4 yards a carry, so nothing great there. He was decent as a receiver. He caught 30 of his 34 targets, went over 200 yards. So he's okay, but he was really nothing special, but that's what they had. Evan Hull, Northwestern, they took him in the 5th round of the draft. Now, so he played on a Northwestern team that kind of struggled last year, right? So he gets 4.1 yards per carry. But was it Evan Hull or was it the offensive line? And I do want to give a little bit of benefit of the doubt to Hull, but he is a good receiver. He catches 55 passes last year, and he was good with his catches. So he does profile as that receiving back. So even if everything shakes out, but if Taylor is in and he's not a full-time 3-down back, which he may not be, Evan Hull has a chance to carve out receiving work. And certainly if Taylor doesn't play, it's going to be a committee. And, if Zach Moss makes it back somewhat soon, it could just be the receiving role goes to Evan Hull. But if we see some missed time from him during the season, now we have to wonder, what's his opportunity to get early down work as well. So again, Evan Hull is a guy, if you're in deep leagues, we don't know what Jonathan Taylor's situation is, but definitely think about it, because he is somebody that could be a valuable fantasy football asset in 2023. Uncle Ted Talks in the house. Welcome. Yep. Cooks are cooked. Oh, man, I like that line. All right, let's compete for a shot at $250,000 in a free RotoWire subscription. You can play the Beat Jim Coventry 3 Drafts NFFC. Love them. That draft is Tuesday, August 15th. 8 p.m. Eastern. The draft will be live streamed. My Twitter page at Jim Coventry NFL. You'll get information on how to do that there. If it's not pinned, I'll make sure that gets pinned today. And New York Jets news is next. We are going to hear most days talk about Breece Hall because it has to be talked about in fantasy football, right? It's so important. And his availability right now is the team is unsure whether he needs a couple more weeks, and we don't really know what's going on, but we know this. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And we said this in other shows. They bring Dalvin Cook in and they visited him. They drafted Israel Abanikanda in the 5th round. They still have Michael Carter. They still have Zonovan Knight. And it's really like, what do we do with this backfield? Because if Breece Hall ends up being healthy at any point, obviously he's the guy. And that could even if it's a second half of the season thing. But for early on, I almost think, again, if Dalvin Cook signs, then he is going to be the number 2. And when Hall is there, it'll be a 1-2 punch and it's over. But if he doesn't, Israel Abanikanda is interesting. And I see him as a fast change of pace runner. He, unlike Michael Carter and Zonovan Knight, he's got that high-end speed. He's a former sprinter, right? Big play speed. He contact balance is good. He has good vision. And I think that is exactly what the Jets want in that offense. They want somebody who's a dynamic to pair in with the dynamic Breece Hall. And so I just think that just keeps the defense on their heels. It allows Aaron Rodgers to kind of work in the passing game, but that speed stresses defense. So Abanikanda, though, he's been coming along a little slowly in the beginning of camp. So we're not sure where he's at right now. Michael Carter is somewhat of an established receiving back. So right now, I think Michael Carter, today has the leg up on that. But again, the Dalvin Cook thing looms, right? So it's all interesting. But right now, drafting a Abanikanda, it's going to take some dominoes to fall in his way for that to work. And as a runner, I want to go further. He has that great speed, but I don't think he's ever like a full-time back. When he switches directions, it really wasn't smooth, and he really doesn't run through tacklers, and his cuts, they're often not decisive. And in the NFL, that's a very important part of it. But in terms of a change of pace runner, we see it all the time. When you have a dynamic speed guy as the change of pace, it works. It's a changeup, and that works very well in the NFL. In terms of Abanikanda, I think, again, if you're drafting way longer than 16 rounds, they're taking a shot at him late. And what I always say is, if you have a league where you can drop players, I think that when you draft a player and you kind of see what his role will be by week 1 or week 2, that's what you want. You don't want to hang with somebody on your roster for 10 weeks and being afraid to drop somebody to go to the waiver wire because you're like, well, what if he hits? Look, if Abanikanda is the third wheel, Breece Hall looks fine in week 1 or week 2, and Dalvin Cook's in there, then we know we could cut bait on Abanikanda and then say, okay, fine, let's find somebody in the waiver wire. But week 1 or week 2, maybe there's no Dalvin Cook, and maybe Abanikanda is the clear number 2, and then you got yourself a great depth option for your fantasy roster. So you definitely want to consider that. Let's go to Seattle Seahawks news. So we talked a little earlier, but there's a little bit of an update here. Kenneth Walker has now been deemed week to week by head coach Pete Carroll. So first, it sounded like a short-term injury. Week to week is a little more significant, but it is a groin injury. It is early in the preseason still, well over a month until opening day. So I would be optimistic that Walker would be ready when things go, but his conditioning could be a little down, and that could also be maybe why the groin injury popped up, but I don't know that for a fact, but it could be. Now, Zach Charbonnet has that indefinite timetable with the shoulder. So, and again, Pete Carroll, he's an injury optimist, but I don't think he's going to give us any concrete information. So right now, we don't know what's going on with the backfield. It's a reasonable assumption to say both Walker and Charbonnet do make it back when the season starts, but we have, and again, if you're in really deep leagues, you've got to have other options. Now, DJ Dallas is a good receiving back. You really don't want to use him a lot on early downs. If they're in an emergency situation, they might. Kenny McIntosh was their 7th round pick this year. And, he played at Georgia. And obviously, with the teams they had, he was overlooked for 3 years. But then last year, he goes 150 carries for 829 yards. That's a great season. And he gets 10 touchdowns. He also, and this is a big part of his game, he's a good receiver. Catches 43 passes, and that's over 10 yards of catches. He goes for 504 yards. He is explosive in the receiving game. And DJ Dallas is reliable. And we don't yet know what McIntosh's pass blocking is like, because that is something we have to factor in. But again, if either of these injuries, Walker or Charbonnet, become something that has a setback, a longer term thing, McIntosh would have a chance to compete or beat DJ Dallas, for the receiving role. But again, it is a crowded depth chart in that way, because the two ahead of them, we have Charbonnet and Walker. They are so clear, the 1 and 2. But again, if you're in these leagues that are more than 20 rounds, and you take a chance that one of those running backs isn't going to be ready, McIntosh is a gamble. But again, you drop him in week 1 or 2, and you use the waiver wire. But it would be a throwaway pick on McIntosh. I would not use any type of legitimate draft capital on him for sure. I'm a commissioner of a lot of leagues, but there's just one 12-team league in particular. And the people in the league there just spread across the time zones, a lot of them spouses, kids, schedules. It's tough. And finding a date for that draft is like brutal, right? Well, I found on my company RotoWire, they have a scheduler. RotoWire.com/scheduler. Again, RotoWire.com/scheduler. And that scheduler allows you to set things up with your league mates so that you can get that great time set up so you can have a successful draft. All right, we're going to get to our fun parts of the show. We're still waiting. At the bottom of the hour, Jorge Martin is coming in talking quarterback draft strategy. But look, I'm going to talk about quarterbacks that we might want to consider avoiding in 2023. And again, you hear me say this every day. I love a lot of these players. but it's situation and circumstance. We have to read the tea leaves and we have to decide, why a running back may not be a value at their ADP. And I was in heavily on Rhamondre Stevenson. I honestly, back in May, I was telling people he will be the lead back over Damian Harris. And then in July, people started catching up with that. And then the ADP actually flipped. It went from Stevenson did go ahead of him. But, if you were drafting early and, we were talking together, you knew Stevenson was the guy then. Here's the deal. Right now, Stevenson is going as the running back 9. Now, my ADP data comes from fantasymojo.com. I'll get the last 3 days ADP from the FFPC drafts. And this is important, these last 3 days, because when we have like injuries, depth chart changes, that reflects the reality. So Fantasy Mojo is the one that you like to go to. And anyway, Stevenson, running back 9, pick 26. And here's the thing. Stevenson, he was a great dual threat running back last year. We know that. He only had 210 carries for a big, strong back. That's a really low number, right? But he did it as a receiver, 89 targets. And when I went back to the running, where he only had 210 carries, it was only 3 times he had more than 15 carries. And there were only 2 games he rushed for more than 76 yards, but he blew it up in those. It was like 160 and 170. He just killed it in those games. And how did he do it? His yards after contact, it was 96%. Stevenson was an absolute beast after contact. Now, early in the season, and almost maybe 2/3 of the way through the season, he was an involved receiver. Obviously, when you have 89 targets, you definitely are, right? And he catches at least 2 passes in every game. And 9 times he had at least 4. So that PPR floor was always high. And then when he had those spike games on the ground, that boosted it even better. But end of the season, though, quietly, Stevenson started slowing down. He recorded 10 or fewer receiving yards in 4 of his last 5 games. And that concerns me. And the other thing that people aren't talking about, Bill Belichick hates fumblers, right? Now, Stevenson fumbles twice as a rookie. He lost 1. And last year, he fumbles 4 times, only loses 1. But Bill Belichick counts it as 4 fumbles. And all of a sudden now in the offseason, they bring in James Robinson and they're, sign him to a 2-year deal, and they drop him then because he's not healthy. They brought at least 3 or 4 other backs, or even Darrell Henderson. They brought like 4 backs in there to talk about. Look, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I don't know if Pierre Strong's going to be a thing as a receiver. I know in the end of OTAs, they were using him heavily as a receiver, and it was really looking his 4.3 whatever speed. It was on display after the catch. So it was really strong. And I don't know if he's going to be a thing, but bringing in all these running backs, they haven't signed one yet. But I am very, very concerned about the fumbling, Bill Belichick, and how Bill Belichick is going to handle that, because he may just be, 1 or 2 more fumbles and I'm done. Stephen Ridley was a great player at the end of the season. And Joanna talks about the ankle sprain that he did. That was a pretty grisly one too. It was in the Arizona game. I remember when he had that, but that was a thing. But the fumbles are going to be not correctable. And you're right. So the volume did go down a bit, but nonetheless, I did see a trend before that where the yardage was starting to slip a little bit, and that they're going to probably go to a little more diversity in the passing. Now, Bill O'Brien is in to run the offense. There's going to be a little more RPO base to it. And from their OTAs, I realized that they want to run their running backs, not just screens and swings. They want to run some routes. So they might need a more accomplished route runner out of the backfield. So that all said, I love Rhamondre Stevenson. I don't trust Bill Belichick. I don't trust that he's going to give him the work. The 15 carries that he only topped a couple times all year, that's not enough work. I don't think the 89 targets is a sustainable number. Don't think we're going to see that. Drafting him at running back 9 is anticipating that type of receiving workload or an exponential increase in running usage. And I just don't see that happening. Love the player. Don't see it happening. Unfortunately, if he was running back 15, I'd be on it all day long. At running back 9 is a strong running back 1. Can't do it. Hey, if you like the show, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. If you're watching on RotoWire YouTube, some are watching elsewhere. It'll help us know that the show's valuable to you or not. And again, please give me a follow on socials at Jim Coventry NFL. Twitter, I put up 5 to 7 player profile threads each week. So great there. Josh Jacobs is next. And, and Joanna totally get it. You know what? That's the beauty of fantasy football, right? The one thing I will guarantee you is I have no monopoly on the truth. And everybody who, like yourself, Joanna, who has a thoughtful opinion, everybody has their chance of being right. I am wrong a lot. No doubt about it. I will say that, full disclosure. But I will at least give you my reasoning as to why. And you make your best decision because you're a very smart fantasy player. And that's the beauty of this forum where we all have our takes and we go strong with them. So always appreciate the input, everybody. Josh Jacobs. So the first thing I said before the contract strife, I've been playing this since 94 and 1994. And I've always said, I struggle to pay for somebody coming off a career year. And the career year, that is one of those things. And Josh Jacobs, the prior 2 years to last year, he was averaging 3.95 yards per carry. And then he goes into what was a contract year. They didn't pick up his 5th-year option. And so that was going to be it for him, right? So we look at this and we're like, okay, Josh Jacobs goes for like a full yard per carry higher and 98th percentile yards after the catch. It was not, 85th percentile yards after contact. He had 340 rushing yards. That was almost 98 more, I think 100 more than he had in previous years. And as a receiver, career best 64 targets. It was insane. They used the heck out of him. He answered the bell. He was very ready for that season. And now going into this season, disgruntled employee. They slapped the franchise tag on him. Hey, he hasn't signed it. He's not in camp. He flew away. So definitely something to think about there. But now the other thing is, let's say he comes back to play. A, he doesn't want to play for the 10 million tag. Second thing is, did he train as hard for this year as he did last year when he thought he's playing for a contract? Now, he knows he could be playing for one for next year. But when you're disgruntled and you're stuck with this team, I think there's a psychological factor to this. So again, repeating the career year is always tough. I don't know if he's going to show up because Josh Jacobs has been a very durable running back, rarely misses time, right? And the next thing is he's proven he could post 2,000 scrimmage yards. So the $10 million this year, if he gets hurt, good luck getting a contract after that. But if, he sits it out, yeah, you missed the 10 million, but he's still going to be 26, I believe, next year. He's 25 this year. So I believe that he could get running backs aren't going to get big contracts, but I believe he could get a 3-year contract. And if he could work that out, he would get more money than he would if playing on 10 million with an injury, if that's what happens. So I just think from a business decision, it's tough for him. And I also think that coming off the career year is not something to bet on. Points per game, the prior 2 years, he was the running back 14. He's going as a running back 10. Last year, obviously, we know he was as good as they came at the running back position. So I am out on Josh Jacobs for those years. There's too much external factors that I am looking at here. I see a little buzz in the room about Tank Bigsby. Tank Bigsby, the one thing I'll say about him in Jacksonville is that he was on Auburn and that offensive line was garbage. And so I think a lot of people were hammering Tank Bigsby and saying that, he's just, he's not a good running back. He didn't have a chance, but he could have a great opportunity to be very strong change of pace behind Travis Etienne. Hey, everyone, I'm going to be at the Fantasy Football Expo a week from now, next weekend, Canton, Ohio, August 11 to 13. Everyone's welcome to go to the expo, and to buy tickets, you just go to thefantasyfootballexpo.com. RotoWire is going to have a booth. I'll be in a few of those expert panel discussions. If you go to the expo, make sure you come by, find me, say hello. Love to meet everyone. All right, a couple more running backs here. We're going to talk about running backs to avoid. I know, look, people, Fantasy Mojo ADP for Rachaad White is running back 23, pick 67. So he is firmly seen as a low-end running back, too. And I know people are seeing Rachaad White as the only game in town. And so it's like, well, why not? Because who else is going to take him over for work? I do want to point out last year that I know the Bucs had terrible play calling. The interior offensive line was terrible. And we could rationalize Rachaad White's 3.7 yards per carry. We could rationalize that away. But I think when we look at it, he couldn't break tackles. 8th percentile. After contact, 36th percentile. So he didn't do very much with his opportunities. And when you look at him physically, he has a very lean lower body. And so it makes sense that when defenders are hitting him low, he's going down. And that's what we're dealing with. And again, that lack of broken tackle rate, that was very problematic. Now, he was involved as a receiver, and he was targeted 5 to 9 times in 4 of his last 6 games. So he was getting a nice PPR floor for us. But remember, he just had 5.8 yards per reception. That is terrible. There is no world where 5.8 yards per reception is useful. So this is a player who was in a situation to play, was on the field, scored some fantasy points. He does lead the depth chart. But here, what are we going to look at now? I think at best he's in a committee. Now, everybody hates Chase Edmonds, and I get it. Remember, his 4 years in Arizona, he's a very good receiver. He's good as a change of pace runner. But then he goes to Miami last year. And immediately, you could see in the first 3 weeks, he could not understand that system. Or I should say understand. He just couldn't run in that system. He didn't have the style to run in it. But then he gets traded to Denver, and he does suffer a high ankle sprain. But in those last couple games, Chase Edmonds looked like the player he looked like in Arizona. So to me, it's a very clear sign that nobody talks about. But once he got out of the wrong system, went into a system where he could thrive or survive, Chase Edmonds was fine again. But it went under the radar. Fantasy playoffs, a lot of people were out. Nobody rostered him. So for the most part, deep leagues, yes. But so anyway, I think Chase Edmonds is a really big obstacle for Rachaad White because the player that he was in Arizona and he was in the last couple games with Denver, I think Chase Edmonds is better than Rachaad White. And I think that he will not take long to take some of the pass catching role for sure. More dynamic as a receiver. I don't think Chase Edmonds is ever going to be that guy you want to lean on in the ground game. You want to give him 5 to 8 carries, that's fine. But I don't think, but I think in terms of targets, yeah, you want to get him the ball on screens. You definitely want to do that. And, and I don't think Keyshawn Vaughn's going to be a thing, but he could have a decent camp. The wild card is Sean Tucker. He had a congenital heart condition, so we don't really know what that is. And so what's interesting with that is, well, Tucker was a good player, and here's my scouting report on him. North-south, he's very explosive. When he gets hit, maintains his balance a bit. In terms of patience, he's a patient runner. Now, Sean Tucker's not laterally agile, doesn't make defenders miss, doesn't have a receiving profile. But what that tells me is this. If Keyshawn Vaughn can't run between the tackles, well, Sean Tucker, if he can, check out healthy from the congenital heart condition, he could be an early down banger for them, bad offensive line, but you want somebody physical. So that totally could work there. So anyway, Sean, I do think that Rachaad White at running back 23, pick 67, I think it's going to be more of a committee than we think, and I am very concerned about that. Jorge Martin, I'm going to bring you in. We have one more running back to talk about. I'm going to properly introduce you after we talk about that running back, but I want you to chip in about Alexander Mattison when I'm done, and then I'll be bringing you. I'll introduce you now. Jorge, great to see you. And Jorge is a writer with RotoWire, Yahoo Fantasy, Fantasy Pros, Fantasy Points. Where isn't Jorge Martin? It's him on the Familia Fantasy Football Podcast. And Jorge, you were the publicity director for the Los Angeles Dodgers, right?
Publications.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
How long ago were you doing that?
I did that from 2006 to 2013. So it was just a highlight of my career. 8 years of getting to be Peter Pan. I got to meet all my childhood heroes because I grew up a Dodger fan, and my job was hard. I had to talk to ball players, past, present, future, major league players, and turned in a magazine at the end of the month. So I made it sound simple, but it was such a labor of love. Dodger Stadium was my office. So gosh,
what a great job. Irreplaceable. Wow. Happy to have you here, Jorge. Jorge, we're on to talk quarterbacks. I have one more running back I have to hit on here, and I'll go over my breakdown. I'd like you to speak on this running back as well. Before I do, somebody was talking about James Conner. I'm going to make a quick point. I did a thread on James Conner. It's on my Twitter feed. James Conner was getting 93% of the work down the stretch last year. From week 10 on, he averaged over 20 PPR points. He did most of that with no Kyler Murray. He did most of that with a garbage offensive line. This year, same garbage offensive line, This year, maybe no Kyler Murray to start the season, but he's done that. But in that scenario, he's averaged 20 PPR points. There is nobody on that depth chart that's going to take work from him. He caught 46 passes, was the second highest of his career. His 4.3 yards per carry was equal to his 2019 in Pittsburgh when he had a decent line. I don't see James Conner's going to the 7th rounds in drafts. Ridiculous. I have him as like a top 15 or 16 running back. He's been the running back 9 at PPR points 2 years running. Quick thought on James Conner, whether you love him or hate him.
I think people just all of a sudden look like he's not gonna be there the whole season. He's still gonna be there a good chunk of games. Maybe he misses a couple, maybe he misses 3 games, but you know what? The days that you have him, you've got a bell cow running back that you got in the 7th round, probably as your, maybe your second running back if you took a anchor RB approach, or he's your 3rd running back. He's a flex play, and I'll take that. And he gets some work in the passing game, like you talked about. They're not gonna be good pass protect. I mean, they're not gonna be good at pass protecting. So there's gonna be a lot of dump offs from Colt McCoy or whoever is throwing to him, and even after Kyler Murray comes back.
And the last thing I'll say, the injury question, there was 1 year in his 6 years he did miss 6 games. And the other 5 years, it's been 2, 3, or 4 games. There was 1, 4, and a bunch of 2 or 3s. Running backs miss time. If you're going to tell me my running back's going to miss 2 to 3 games, I can live with that, especially if I'm popping a 6th-round pick on him. All right, the last running back I did want to talk about, the Jorge, before that question came in, was Alexander Mattison. Now, in his career, he's been the backup for Dalvin Cook. When Cook missed times, he's had some really good games. Sometimes he didn't have good games when he subbed in for him. What I do want to point out was his first 2 years in the league, and the work's always been limited. But the first 2 years, he was 4.6 and 4.5 yards per carry. The last 2 years, 3.8 and 3.7. Yet the Minnesota offensive line was better than it was then. So that was interesting. Broken tackle rate was fine, 79th percentile, but he doesn't do anything with it. Only 34th percentile after the contact. So that early career explosiveness we used to see, I think that's kind of gone away quickly for him. And then in short yardage, he's been an issue because he bounces too many runs to the outside and he just doesn't hit the hole. And that's been an issue. And so now, yes, he is the lead guy. He goes into camp as the clear number 1. But he could get out competition. Ty Chandler last year had a good camp. We'll see if that pans out again. Dwayne McBride, 7th-round draft pick. He will have an opportunity to mix in. Kenny Nwangu, he could be a receiving back. Maybe, possibly. His 4.3 speed, he's not a guy you want to run as an interior runner. I just think that Mattison is not nearly as good as what people think he was when he had those occasional big games when Cook was out. And I think eventually this is going to be a committee. But good or bad or indifferent, how do you think about Mattison, Jorge?
I'm kind of with you on that one because he's not as good as Dalvin Cook. That's the thing. I think people are expecting the Dalvin Cook workload, which ends up being 1,100 yards, 300 to 400 1,100 rushing yards, and about 300 receiving yards. I just don't see it. I also think the fact that I don't know if the volume's going to be there because I think they're going to up their pass volume this year. They're adding Jordan Addison to the passing attack with Justin Jefferson. If he's not the best receiver in the NFL, they're not taking roll call too long. And you got TJ Hawkinson in there. And don't forget, KJ Osborne was pretty good in a pinch last year. So they're going to throw. The other part about it is their defensive secondary is not expected to be good. Matthew Collar, Purple Insider, he and I sat down and he told me, yeah, they're going to be in some shootouts. So what happens with shootouts? It's going to be Kirk Cousins. And also they've got the scheduling gods kind of helped them out. They don't have like a late season trip to Green Bay, and that home schedule at the end of the season is pretty good. So that's going to be conducive to the passing game for them. And so that's why I think that the volume's just not going to be there. I don't see him even hitting 1,000 yards this season. And also the fact that it's pretty good running backs behind him.
Yeah, so I am with you on that. I'm avoiding him as ADP. I think people think they have this pot of gold, a 3-down back, and I just don't think it's very few running backs in the NFL are getting that full workload. It rarely happens. Last thing before we get quarterbacks, Reggie, Uncle Ted is saying Roschon Johnson has a clear path to the running back 1 in Chicago. Here's what I'll say about Roschon Johnson. When the Bears drafted him, they talked about A, he's a great leader. B, he's a great special teams player. And then at the end of the discussion, they kind of threw in he could pass block a little bit. I don't think Roschon Johnson is more than a core special teamer this year. Do you feel any differently, Jorge?
Well, you know what? I think there's what's funny. I just wrote about the Chicago backfield in Yahoo Fantasy yesterday, and trying to kind of make up for the kind of clear up the mud that it is, and that's one of the muddiest backfields that there is. So you got here the three guys that we're talking about. It's Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, and D'Onta Foreman. A couple of things that are kind of chinks in the armor for Khalil Herbert. Not very good in the red zone. Inside the 5-yard line, he had 8 rushing attempts and he had only 7 yards. Did not score a touchdown. D'Onta Foreman was the absolute last ranked pass blocker among running backs last year. And what are they going to do? They want to protect Justin Fields and kind of make him better. So Roschon Johnson kind of does a lot of little things. I don't think he's going to do a lot early on, but I can see a path where at the end of the season with the pass blocking is going to get him on the field. And he's a bigger back. He's got explosiveness. He's fresher. He doesn't have the dings and dents that Khalil Herbert and D'Onta Foreman have. So he might have those fresh legs at the end of the season to be kind of a flex play. So I'm grabbing him late, and I'm trying really, really hard not to drop him, for a kicker or a defense or something like that, just to see if I could get to that back half of the season where I think he might make some noise, kind of like Tyler Algier did last year.
Exactly. It's a good call there. I'm the donkey who's taking Foreman as many shares as I could get. I see Foreman, and you're right about the pass blocking. Not a good pass blocker, but I think as an early down grinder, and they're going to run some. And at the goal line, he's like 230 something pounds. And what we saw was 2 years ago with the Titans when Derrick Henry went out, very effective. Last year when Christian McCaffrey went out, very effective. Chicago was one of the better run blocking lines in the league last year. Pass protection was awful. It was dismal. And then they picked Darnell Wright at the top of the first round. And so that run blocking potentially could get a little better. But like Jorge said, it's a very muddy backfield. Everybody needs to take a stance on it. Jorge has the idea that Roschon Johnson may become something down the road. But that said, any investment in that backfield could either boom or it could bust, including D'Onta Foreman, who I like. Jorge,
can I give you a quick stat that I found amazing?
Yes.
In one of the last games of the season, Justin Fields was sacked 7 times in one game. Jim Hart in I think it was 1974 got sacked six times the entire season. So it was a crazy stat that I found.
Now, Jorge, I do. You know what? If we have a minute, I do want to, because there are groups out there that believe that quarterback sacks are a quarterback stat. They're not an offensive line stat. Now, sometimes the line is so bad. You got Joe Burrow, and he had no line 2 years ago. Yes, when Tennessee sacked him 9 times, that wasn't a quarterback stat. But a lot of these mobile quarterbacks, they're their own worst enemy because they're trying to buy time. And honestly, I don't think I want a traditional pass blocking back because Justin Fields is not going to be sitting there in the pocket. So what are you pass protecting? He may be running here. He may switch directions, go there. So you could be a pass blocking running back, but this may be one of those equations where what are you blocking? Who are you blocking? Because the whole play changes in a nanosecond. So, and again, you may well be right on this, but I do think that this is not, you don't need a typical in the middle, in the pocket pass blocker to pick up the blitz. This is a different scenario. Any thoughts on that?
No, you know what? I think you nailed it on talking about the fact that the quarterbacks are going big game hunting, especially Justin Fields. I mean, he's a guy who's just, looking to shoot down the field. And you are asking a lot of your pass block, of your offensive line. You're asking a lot of your tight ends. You're asking a lot of your of any running backs to kind of chip block or something like that, because the fact that and so that makes it harder. I don't want to put it all on the offensive line, because you're right. I mean, how many times have we seen Russell Wilson just run around like he's Fran Tarkenton? And then it was great. Fran Tarkenton ran all the way to the Hall of Fame.
He did.
But then all of a sudden, Russ has bigger, faster, stronger guys than were chasing down Fran Tarkenton in the 70s. So I think these guys. Gosh, I mean. it's tough. I mean, every offensive lineman is going up against a better athlete every week. And that's why big ups to those guys. And that's why it's like the teams that have the great offensive lines are usually the teams in the playoffs.
100%. Jorge, we were here to talk quarterback strategy. I'm finally 9 minutes later getting you on there right now. What are you, first of all, noticing in the many drafts you do about the handling of the drafting of quarterbacks? What trends are you seeing before I ask you about some specific strategies to attack that?
Yeah, people are not scared about going early on quarterbacks. You get the elite three are gone by, mid to late second or to early third round. Yeah, it's crazy, but I think it's kind of like a 7 or 8 that really is the elite tier for me. And I want one, I mean, we'll get into it, but I want one of those guys before we get into before on my single quarterback teams, because the fact that, gosh, I mean, I think they are just such an incredible advantage, not just from production, but also consistency. They're going to give you week-to-week consistency that I don't know if guys in the late rounds are going to give to you.
So the first question based on that then is, there's that clear first tier of Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, any order. Whoever has number one, I'm not fighting with you on that one. Are you drafting any of those top 3 quarterbacks with the freight that it takes, where it's usually second round, maybe early third? Are you taking any of those?
Yes. I am looking to do that because the fact that, I usually take like a hero or zero RB approach. And so if I'm taking a zero RB approach and I can get a running back and receiver in the first 2 rounds, and I could circle back and grab one of those 3 guys right after that, then I'm just hammering receiver. I'm hammering receiver, and I'm waiting on that second running back and the tight end, because the fact that I just want that positional advantage. Josh Allen was the number 3 in fantasy points per game behind Allen and Hurts. I mean, behind Mahomes and Hurts. He was almost 3 points ahead of Joe Burrow, who was number 4, and then it just went down from there. So they're that big of an advantage. And here's another thing that I was looking at, just from playing best ball. So many people are looking at Week 17, championship week, having a team that's set up. These are the matchups. All 3 of those quarterbacks are home. Mahomes has got Cincinnati shootout. You've got Hurts at home against the Arizona Cardinals, rebuilding defense. He's going to have a field day. And Josh Allen is going up against the New England Patriots. In his last 5 victories, there's 1 loss in there, but going back to 2020, the last 5 victories, he's thrown for 283 yards and 17 total touchdowns, 283 yards per game. So I want that, and I want that advantage in Week 17.
That's a great point, because, hey, if you're looking to make it to the finals, we all are. That's the way to go. You've got that hammer in Week 17. You got to love it. So, Jorge, so basically you said earlier, just want to recap this for the audience, you predicated the reason you want to take one of these 3 quarterbacks is because you're either going to go with the hero running back, which is one strong running back that deal with them later, or the zero running back where you really don't start drafting until probably the 5th round or later or so. So that's the scenario. If a drafter out there wants to go with a more traditional build, that kind of takes them out of the market on those 3 quarterbacks, because they want to start with either 2 receivers, 2 running backs, 1 and 1, and all of a sudden the odds of getting those 3 quarterbacks drop significantly. So there is another tier of quarterbacks, and it's generally considered to be, in any order, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields. Depending on scoring system, people have those jumbled up. Do you see that second tier being those 4? And what are your thoughts on that area?
Oh, I love all those 4. I mean, those guys are just, they all have incredible upside, even potentially, our QB1 upside. Joe Burrow gives us a little scare. I'm a little more worried about his outlook, but basically, I mean, he could be Patrick Mahomes light. He could give you a 4,800 yards, 300 to 400 yards rushing, and 40 total touchdowns. Justin Herbert is only 2 years removed from a 5,000-yard season with 38 touchdowns, and he's going to be throwing down the field. Lamar Jackson has QB1 in his sights, because the fact that they're going to look to throw more, and maybe they run the ball as much as Josh Allen runs. I'll take my chances. I'll take my chances that Lamar Jackson is going to throw for over 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. And Justin Fields, I mean, he ran for 1,100 yards, and they added DJ Moore. What happened the last time that a quarterback ascending into, the last couple of times? Yeah, Jalen Hurts last year, added A.J. Brown, became a top 3 quarterback. Josh Allen, 2020, add Stephon Diggs. You had in 2021, Matthew Stafford gets Cooper Kupp. I mean, just magic happens when they get a top flight receiver. People are going to say, oh, they're not going to pass enough. They're going to pass more. They're not going to be one of the teams that runs the most. I think they were number 2 in total rushing attempts last year. No, they're going to add passing attempts this year because the fact they need to. They don't want to run Justin Fields too much.
And I'm glad you brought up, among others, you brought up Jalen Hurts, because honestly, people were not thinking much of Jalen Hurts as a passer going in last year. Now, I know he gets the bonus of having A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert, but regardless, he was not expected to be a great passer, and he really showed it. Justin Fields, when he was drafted, he has an arm. He definitely has the arm for it. And so I think making that connection, yes, he has DJ Moore. Darnell Mooney's not a terrible number 2. He was able to win that 2 years ago when he had 1,045 yards, like 12 of those games with Fields. He wasn't just a deep threat. He began to win all over the field. And it's a number 2. I think he has a really good number 2 there. So I do any of those. So if there is a draft where you're going not with hero running back or zero running back, will this be the next section of quarterbacks? Are you going to take one of those in those particular drafts, or how are you going to handle that group?
In single quarterback drafts, I want one of those. Up to. I think I'd add Trevor Lawrence into that group because I think he's taking another step forward this year to the guys we just talked about. I want one of those guys. If for some reason the draft breaks a certain way, maybe I'm picking at the end and then there's a run that just takes out all those guys. I'm actually punting, and I did this in one of our Vegas drafts. I'm punting to my Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins strategy, where I just load up at the beginning with skill players, just even adding bench players, and then I try and maybe stack them with Cousins and Goff, because of the fact that I'm playing them as home as much as possible. And their home, between the two of them, they have a home game 13 out of 17 times during the season through the fantasy playoffs. And after week 6, they're at least one of them is playing either home or in a dome from week 6 through week 17. So I love that. I did that strategy, so I'm going to try it out. I'm going to try it out and see how that was your robust RB where you were in the other draft and you went your robust RB approach. So I did my Goff Cousins Hermanos strategy, but for the most part, I want through Trevor Lawrence, one of those guys, because I think there starts to be some warts on the guys after that. A lot of guys who are really good at home, like the guys I just talked about, Goff and Cousins, and maybe they're just kind of less so. So I'm not going to. I want more consistency that I think I'm going to see from those first 7 or 8.
So basically, I mentioned the tier of Fields, Burrow, Jackson, and Herbert. And then you said, and a lot of people do have Trevor Lawrence in that tier. I have no argument with that. I have him just outside, but he's right there. I have my final tier of that group being Lawrence and Watson. Like I said, whether Lawrence is where you have more, it doesn't really matter. It's the same. But that, for me, that's the end of it. And Deshaun Watson, and my big rallying cry this offseason has been that, look, I don't like what he did as a human being, not a fan of him as a person. But last year, he was away from the game for almost 2 years. And the speed of the game is something that is not easy to reacclimate to. I believe his problems were truly that. What I've heard from OTAs in the early days of camp is that Watson is no longer thinking about where to throw the ball, that's the speed of the game thing is. When you don't reclaim the speed of the game, you're thinking instead of playing. And apparently, and I assume that would go away this year. And it's from all early reports, the aspect. Remember, this guy was a top 4 quarterback in his days in Houston. And so if I pass on that second group of quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson are fine for me. Any thoughts on Deshaun Watson?
You know what? They added Elijah Moore, who apparently has looked really good in camp. You know, he's got weapons. He's got Amari Cooper, who's still very much in his prime, coming off one of his best seasons last year. I mentioned Moore. He's got a great safety valve in David Njoku, and he's also got Nick Chubb, who is going to keep the defense honest. So they're not, in play action. Oh my goodness! Can you imagine what's going to happen when he takes the ball out of Nick Chubb's gut, and then he looks out, and he's going to have just 3 premier pass catchers out there for him. So I think it's gonna. I think the odds are looking really good that he's going to take a step forward. I just want a little more. I want to feel a little more certain. But again, if Watson is the next guy, I'm going to. If I just miss out on Lawrence, I am going to be looking at Watson.
So Jorge, I think a big question before we move forward with this is, in past years, quarterbacks were far less valued. And we had a comment in the board, I think from Uncle Ted, that was true in many years. Quarterbacks are like outfielders in baseball, a dime a dozen. And the running back ones, receiver ones are rare. What's different this year? There's a very real reason why this year the top quarterbacks have moved up, and there's been a big chasm between the top and then, because it used to be top 15 quarterbacks are fine. This year it's like 9, and after that it's a lot of questions. Why is the difference this year?
The consistency factor. When you're talking about Mahomes, he was top six in fantasy scoring 13 out of the 16 weeks. So that he played through week 17. So, and then you had Hurts was 11 times before, and he got hurt there at in week 14. You had Josh Allen, I think it was 10 or 11 times. So you get that consistent scoring every week. You had Geno Smith, who was the QB5 on the season, QB5 in total points, and he was out of the top 10 times last year. So you're giving yourself a chance with these stud quarterbacks. You're giving yourself a weekly opportunity to win, and with very, very few clunkers in there. So I want that. Plus, it's also fun to see what your team looks like when you got that big number at the top of your scoring. I think psychologically, it's just a lot more fun that way. And really, fantasy football should be fun. Let's have fun, familia.
100, right? This is a game. We want to win, and it's very important. But yes. Now, do you have a couple more minutes?
Absolutely. Go for it.
So we're having some questions in the chat about Dak Prescott, and love the quarterback. Great processor. Reads the field. He can get to his 4th read. Very, very solid there. What are your thoughts? But why is Dak Prescott downgraded this year? I have him downgraded this year, and I love the quarterback. Why are fantasy players down on him?
I think fantasy players are down on him because he missed a few games last year. And I think that psychologically, when you don't see that a guy played 17 games and he doesn't have the numbers that he gets downgraded. I think he's a very good NFL quarterback. He's not running as much as he used to. So I think that's why people are, another reason why people are doing that. And I don't blame him for not running. I mean, he had a catastrophic ankle injury that before would have ended Joe Theismann's career. So the one thing that I just want to make sure anybody who's drafting Dak Prescott, I think Dak Prescott's at the point where you want to back up just in case, because he's not as good on the road as he is at home. So, that to me is the only thing that just kind of worries me a little bit on him. But other than that, I mean, I do like him. I like getting Brandon Cooks as the wide receiver too. Getting Michael Gallup to have a full off season, so in his second full season coming off the ACL surgery. Don't sleep on Jake Ferguson, anybody. Don't sleep on Jake Ferguson. He's I've been grabbing him so late in underdog drafts, and I grabbed him in Scott Fishbowl. So I'm look at what Dalton Schultz did there. So there's opportunity in that offense.
I got sniped in pros versus Joes. I wanted to make Ferguson my 3rd tight end, and I saw where all the other pros versus Joes were, and I thought I was okay in the 15th round. I wasn't. Somebody took him in the 14th. I'm like, 79th percentile yards after the catch. Jake Ferguson, limited obviously limited sample size. I think he had 19 targets, but Dalton Schultz is a classic catch and fall guy. That's all he was. But Dak Prescott reads zone defenses so well. Jake Ferguson can actually get yards after the catch that Dalton Schultz couldn't. And over the years, and I know Jason Witten was in there for some of that time, which explains it, but the Dallas tight end position is usually pretty fruitful for fantasy because Dak Prescott's ability to navigate zones. A couple more quick ones. Aaron Rodgers. We had Joe, our friend of the show, Joe, ask, what do you think about Aaron Rodgers as a fantasy quarterback this year?
I like him. I'm going to keep an eye on him early on because he's got a really tough schedule early on. I think in the back half of the season, I think he's going to be a stud. They got some really, good home games. It's going to be, and a lot of home games, easier home games. So I think I like him. I think he's kind of like in that 10 to 13 range a lot because he doesn't have the rushing upside. And I think there could be a little bit of a learning curve. Look at Tom Brady's 2020 season. It was, people look at he had the monster close. The first half of the season, there were some growing pains in there. And, it's learning a new offense after a long time. But, as soon as I will feel a lot better when Garrett Wilson is back and 100% off that ankle. I hate ankle injuries. They just yes. They seem to linger and they seem to just really, really screw up seasons.
Jorge, both Dak and Aaron Rodgers, one of my concerns for fantasy is both defenses could be so good that they end up offensively wanting to run the ball, keep the game scores low, win these close, hard-fought games. Dallas used to have the advantage for Dak that their defense would give up 30 points, so Dak was going to be throwing 40 times. That may not, and they bring in Brian Schottenheimer as the OC. Oh my goodness. And then Mike McCarthy. Remember when the Packers would have leads, he would just bury the passing game in the second half. And so the coaching scares me greatly. And then Robert Saleh, their defense has been like top 10, but obviously they don't put up the sacks yet. But I think they make the 15th, Will McDonald, 15th pick in the draft. They bring him in. I think, we might be able to see, Johnson. I can't think of his first name. Jermaine Johnson from last year, the 10th pick. He could have a little bump in production, but that defense could be very, very good. And remember, Rodgers is back with Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator, and Rodgers is only averaging 520 pass attempts in the Green Bay days with him. That number's not going up in New York.
Oh, absolutely not. He makes his greatness on pass efficiency, and he also kind of slows down the game a little bit. He burns the clock a lot. So that's the reason why when he throws, I think what was it when he threw the 48 touchdowns? I think he threw like 517 passes that season.
Yes,
and that was just amazing. That's just amazing efficiency. So I like him. I want one of those guys that I mentioned earlier before him, yes. or maybe have Rodgers be someone I like pair with like a Dak or a Herbert or a Daniel Jones, one of those guys.
So I think what Jorge and I just kind of established based on what we've seen in drafts, what our own personal philosophies are, we just see that consistency and high-end floor ceiling of the top guys. The guys that are outside the top 9 or so, they don't likely have that. And so it's a matter of getting that weekly advantage. In the fantasy community, based on the draft that we've seen, has bought in that. Most years it's an early summer thing and then it goes back to normal in August. Not going back this year. Jorge, tell everybody what work you have going on, where they can find you. Is everywhere, but I want you to tell everybody and we'll get you rolling here.
You can find me at Jorge Martin 17 on Twitter. That's primarily I'm finishing up my NFL Insider series. I only got 3 more left with NFL insiders who are kind of going through all the everything going into the season from a fantasy standpoint. I've got a weekly column coming in from Yahoo and concentrating on running backs. So that's where the Roschon Johnson background came yesterday. So I had one yesterday. So I'm really, really fired up about this season coming up. This is an exciting time. So and Jim, as always, I love hanging out with you. Can't wait to hang out with you in Ohio in about 10 days.
Yeah, the Fantasy Football Expo. Everybody's welcome to come to that. You can get tickets at thefantasyfootballexpo.com, Canton, Ohio. Get there as early as Thursday. Get there Friday. Stay through Sunday when the expo is. It's going to be a great weekend of events in Canton. Jorge Martin, very glad that we became friends and we're able to work together now. Your work is all over the place and people should be following you, reading it, and learning more about you. I'd like to thank you for coming on my show. Thank you to everyone for your time and hanging out with us. Remember, tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern on RotoWire YouTube. We'll be back. Guest tomorrow. Another friend of mine, strong fantasy analyst, Doug Orth. Everybody have a wonderful day.